Hello, the topic of this video is an in-depth analysis of Airbnb's impact on the global housing crisis, also the urban aesthetics and the city metabolism. So guys, the rise of short-term rental platforms such as Airbnb that I'm seeing here on the screen, and which has become this dominant model, it has triggered a major shift in the political economy, with Airbnb as its dominant model. First appeared as a friendly promise of a sharing economy, but now has turned it into a powerful engine of platform capitalism. So this engine here, it pushes the finalization of housing and extracts value from residential neighborhoods at a large scale. So in this video, I will show you this full and multidimensional analysis of this phenomenon. So I will bring together historical materialism, the sociology of aesthetics, also urban ecology and engineering to offer a critical diagnosis of these technical solutions. In presenting myself, I'm Felipe Boni, one of the founders of Ugreen, and Ugreen is a global sustainability ecosystem that works across three pillars. So we have education, we have project delivery, and also a specialized consulting. So we train professionals in more than 188 countries through our schools focused on sustainable architecture, wellness, materials, also ESG, and we also support companies and brands with tailored consulting to create truly sustainable projects, products, and strategies. So our purpose is to accelerate the transition toward a more sustainable future, combining technical knowledge with real, measurable impact. So if you want to know more about our services, go to the links in the description. And let's continue. So by connecting these different fields, this video will show that the Airbnb effect is not just a disruption to the hotel industry. It is a deep transformation of urban life itself. So one that places exchange value above the use value, and also short-term consumption above community stability, and algorithmic efficiency above social cohesion. So defining a story of the sharing economy promised a post-capitalist future. So in that vision, people would monetize underused assets, such as spare rooms, empty beds, to build the social connection and use resources more efficiently. But a strict materialist analysis showed that this story works mainly as an ideological mask, because behind it stands a sharper and more aggressive form of capital accumulation. And this shift from sharing to platform capitalism marks a deep change in how profit is extracted from the built environment. So platform capitalism does not create goods. Instead, it builds an in-between infrastructure that extracts rent from interactions. So in housing, Airbnb does not build homes. It will capture the existing housing stock and will lock it into a digital market. And here I'm seeing many apartments in my region in South America. So this lets capital flow into residential neighborhoods that were once shielded from the volatility of global tourism. So this shift is best understood through financialization, because housing becomes less of a shelter and more of a financial asset or a tool for capital appreciation. And this platform history shows a clear move away from the amateur host, that is, that homeowner renting a spare room. So here we have the professionalization and the growth of Madrid. So data shows that the market is now dominated by professional operators, also property management firms, and hosts with many listings who manage property portfolios instead of a single home. So in cities like Berlin and New York, professionalization is not an accident. It's a structural need for platform growth, because professional hosts, they provide a stable and standardized inventory that the platform needs to compete with the hotel industry. And studies of inequality in Airbnb markets show that these markets are highly unequal. And here we can understand more. So let's take a look in Prague here. In horizontal, it means the amount of population, and in vertical, it means the revenue. So in horizontal, 100% of people is 100% here, and in vertical, 100% of the Airbnb income that a city can get. So it means that 80% of people in Prague will get 30% of the income. So it means that the remaining 20% will get the remaining 70% of the income. So here we can see the inequality. Florence here, 80% of people will get 40% of the income. So the remaining 20% will get 60% of the income. So here we have less inequality. But in Austin here, it's even worse. 80% of people who are putting a home to rent in Airbnb will get around 15% of the income. So the remaining 20% will get 85% of the income. And that inequality is rising. So this points to a concentration of power in the hands of a small group of professional hosts, which contradicts the company's narrative of decentralization and individual empowerment. So the rhetoric of home sharing persists, but the mature reality is a distributed, dysregulated hotel industry. And to understand the economic engine that drives Airbnb, we must revisit and update Neil Smith's classic rent rent gap theory. So in here, Smith argued that gentrification happens when there is a large gap between capitalized land rent, so what a property earns today, and the potential land rent, so what it could earn under its highest and best use. And before platforms existed, closing this rent gap required heavy capital investment. So developers needed to buy rundown buildings, evict tenants, and renovate entire structures to attract wealthier residents. But Airbnb introduced a new kind of gap, the short-term rent gap. So this is the difference between what a property earns on the long-term rental market, this line here by the housing locals, and what it can earn on the short-term tourist market by these housing visitors. So the platform's key innovation is that allow owners to exploit this gap with almost no new capital investment. Because unlike traditional gentrification, which requires major physical upgrades, the Airbnbification often needs only small cosmetic changes, such as new sheets, Wi-Fi, a smart lockbox, to shift the unit from the residential circuit to the tourist circuit. And the speed of the shift is alarming, because in New York, spatial analysis showed that the capital moves fast into areas where the short-term rent gap is widest. And this often happens even before any real decline in long-term rental income. So both developers and tenants who sublet take part in this process. And in countries such as Portugal, Italy, Greece, and Spain, which were hit hard by 2008 crisis, Airbnb first appeared as an economic lifeline, but it soon became a driver of displacement, because in Lisbon and Athens, potential tourist income rose far above what local agents could support, and property owners acted rationally with capitalist logic and removed units from the residential market. So Airbnb has helped crystallize new class formations within cities. At the top is a new renter class, not only traditional landlords, but also platform entrepreneurs who use mortgage debt and venture capital to accumulate housing units for short-term rental. And of course, this class benefits from the platform's digital reach and also its liquidity, and their revenue streams detach from the ability of local workers to pay rent. A dangerous trend within the system is the rise of the algorithmic management of the housing stock. So dynamic pricing tools, similar to airline models, and also as Live Nation uses for concerts. This will let hosts adjust prices in real time to maximize rent extraction. And more troubling is the spread of large-scale algorithmic price coordination, such as the software provided by RealPage in the US. So these systems can lead to price collusion, raising rents across entire markets while keeping occupancy low to maintain high prices. So the datafication of housing markets makes it even harder for ordinary people to find shelter, pushing housing further into the realm of pure finance. And below this renter class sits a precarious workforce that services the units. So the Airbnb gig economy includes cleaners, check-in workers, and the maintenance staff. And unlike unionized hotel workers, this workforce is often informal, subcontracted, and lacks labor protections. And of course, research shows that platforms classify workers as independent contractors to avoid minimum wage laws and labor rights, worsening this precarity. So experiences are going to vary. Some workers use the platform for extra income and report satisfaction, but those who depend on it for basic needs, they face higher insecurity and lower earnings. So this shows that platforms free ride on traditional employers who still provide job stability. And the benefits and harms of Airbnb are not evenly distributed. They follow sharp racial and geographic lines. So in cities like New York, higher densities of Airbnb listings overlap with neighborhoods where rents are already above average, deepening this affordability crisis. And because of the discrimination of the platform, economic gains tend to concentrate among white hosts, while communities of color are often excluded for income flows, and they are going to be exposed to negative impacts like tourist-driven displacement. So in New Orleans, for example, the boom of short-term rentals in historically black neighborhoods has driven both cultural and physical displacement, and this has sparked legal battles over property rights versus community well-being. And algorithmic housing tools also risk producing old patterns of segregation. So price optimization algorithms can target and exploit specific supermarkets, reinforcing social spatial inequality. Also, alongside the economic homogenization of housing markets, there is also an aesthetic homogenization of the interior space. So this term is coined as Airspace, and will describe the spread of minimalist, this generic look, marked by reclaimed wood, some add some bulbs as well, some industrial furniture, white walls, succulent plants, and touches of this Scandinavian design. There is going to dominate Airbnb listings around the globe. And this aesthetic is not just a passing trend, it is a functional requirement of the platform economy, because in this digital marketplace where users scroll through thousands of thumbnails, design works as a signal of safety and predictability. So Airspace tells the global traveler that a room in Tokyo, in Berlin, in Mexico City will meet a familiar standard of cosmopolitan comfort. So it removes friction from travel and lets guests stay inside a bubble of familiarity even when they are supposedly in a foreign place. So this foreign experience is going to be outside the hotel. And this result here is a paradox because Airbnb markets itself on the promise of living like a local and experience a uniqueness. Yet algorithm pressure and guest reviews push hosts toward a standardized global aesthetics to secure bookings. So the local is cleaned up and packaged into recognizable tropes and staged authenticity, where the messiness of real urban life is softened by the visual language of Pinterest boards. And Airbnb core value proposition is authenticity because guests want access to the backstage of the city, to the neighborhoods where locals actually live, instead of the tourist zones around big hotels. But this search for authenticity produces a feedback loop that destroys the very quality it tries to consume. So as tourists flood the residential neighborhoods in search of authentic experiences, the amenities in those neighborhoods will shift to serve them. So local bakeries become specialty coffee shops, hardware stores turn into boutique souvenir shops, affordable diners become farm-to-table concept restaurants. So this process, which is called tourism gentrification, it hollows out local culture and turns the neighborhood into a simulation of itself. And hosts play a key role in this process through aesthetic labor. So they curate their spaces and their interactions to perform a certain vision of local identity. So they become local guides and concierges, selling not only a bed but a lifestyle. And this performance often relies on cultural stereotypes that meet tourist expectations instead of challenging them. And visual studies of Airbnb listings in Malaysia, for example, show how authenticity and commercialization blur, erasing the line between peer-to-peer lodging and the traditional hotel industry. And Pierre Bourdieu's theories of distinction and cultural capital offer a sharp way to understand the sociology of the Airbnb market. Because this ability to decode the signs inside of Airbnb listing, like knowing that a specific mid-century modern chair signals good taste, this is a form of cultural competence that separates users by class. And Airbnb listings are texts that people read through the lens of class. So for example, this apartment here in New York. So we will see here panoramic skyline, calm amid the buzz of downtown. Sometimes you will find words like bohemian, curated, artisanal, or up and coming. That is a code word for gentrified. So it helps attract a specific demographic of guests while excluding others. And of course, hosts with high levels of cultural capital are better able to craft these narratives, allowing them to charge a premium. So this reinforces inequality because those with the right aesthetic skills, often linked to race and class, they can extract more value from their properties than those without them. So this Airspace aesthetic also expresses the hegemony of the global creative class. And it is the aesthetic of the digital nomad, the tech worker, and the cosmopolitan elite. And by spreading the aesthetic into neighborhoods across the globe, Airbnb enables a subtle form of cultural imperialism, where local design traditions are erased or reduced to kitsch accents inside an otherwise standardized global interior. So authenticity becomes a consumer product, detached from its historical and social roots, and turns into a marker of distinction for tourists who see themselves as superior travelers rather than mass tourists. And of course, turning a home into a short-term rental changes its emotional geography as well. So a home is usually understood as a space of privacy, stability, and dwelling. It's a shelter in a heartless world. And Airbnb transformed the home into a space of public performance and also transient consumption. And for neighbors, this transformation is often traumatic. So the arrival of transient strangers into semi-private spaces of apartment buildings, such as hallways, elevators, courtyards, it disrupts the phenomenology of dwelling. So this sense of safety and community familiarity is replaced by the anxiety of encountering unknown visitors, the sound of rolling suitcases, and the loss of neighborliness. So the building stops functioning as a community and becomes a hotel. And residents experience a displacement in place. So it's a feeling of alienation inside their own homes, even though they have not physically moved. And in other housing and domestic spaces, show that privacy and control over household boundaries are essential for well-being, especially for marginalized groups. So this forced permeability of the home under Airbnb breaks these boundaries and creates emotional spaces filled with tension and contradiction. And Airbnb has aggressively promoted the idea that home sharing is more environmentally sustainable than staying in hotels. And the claim says that by using existing housing stock, the platform avoids the carbon emissions linked to building new hotels, and that residential homes use less energy than large commercial complexes. But recent research in urban metabolism and also in life cycle assessment show that this green image is mostly a mirage. This major study focused on Sydney, Australia, breaks this illusion. So even if the direct emissions of an Airbnb stay are similar to, or let's say, or slightly lower than an economy hotel, between 9.27 and 9.39 kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent per room and night, the picture changes completely when induced emissions are included. And induced emissions come from how hosts spend the extra income they earn. So if hosts use Airbnb revenue to increase their own consumption, let's say upgrading their lifestyle, traveling more, or renovating their homes, the net carbon footprint surges. And in the scenario where hosts spend all extra income, total carbon emissions can reach 602 kilograms CO2 equivalent per room per night. So this is an amount similar to an economy class flight from Sydney to Auckland. And the platform also fuels induced travel. So by lowering the cost of lodging and opening non-traditional destination, Airbnb encourages more frequent, shorter trips, often by air. And the rise of weekend gateways enabled by the platform adds significantly to aviation emissions. And also the hotelization of residential units changes the waste flows of a neighborhood. And of course, tourists have consumption patterns that differ sharply from residents. They rely heavily on single-use plastics, takeaway packaging, and small format hygiene products. And hotels often use centralized waste management and recycling systems. But Airbnb units, in contrast, sit inside municipal residential waste systems. They are rarely designed to handle the volume and type of waste generated by constant turnover. And also we have the problem of the food waste, and this is a serious issue. A study from the Ohio State University found that tourists and short-term rentals waste more than 2.3 billion in food each year in the US alone. So about 5.1% of the nightly rate is effectively thrown away as uneaten food. And guests cannot take leftover groceries or restaurant leftovers with them due to air travel. And hosts often discarded open items for hygiene or clean policy reasons. And the rapid turnover of Airbnb units creates a buy and discard cycle that is far worse than that of a stable household. Now we need to talk about the water consumption, and here is a case study of Barcelona. And the difference in water use is stark, especially in regions facing water stress. So in Barcelona, the city government estimates that residents use about 99 liters of water per person per day, while tourists in hotels and tourist apartments can use 163 to over 400 liters per day. And this comes from the vacation mindset, so long showers, filling pools, and also the operational demands like washing linens and towels between each guest. So during a moment when Catalonia has declared a drought emergency with strict restriction on residents and farmers, prioritizing water for tourism creates a deep environmental injustice. And also talking again about the airspace, this static pressure of the airspace, it fuels a constant renovation cycle with a hidden environmental cost. Because to stay competitive and justify higher nightly rates, hosts and investors repeatedly upgrade their properties. So kitchens get ripped out for quartz countertops, floors get replaced, furniture is discarded in favor to the latest trend, and the churn of interior materials adds significantly to the embodied carbon, so the emissions tied to extracting, manufacturing, and transporting building materials. And studies show that interior renovations called tenant improvements can account for half of a commercial building's life cycle carbon footprint. So the professionalization of the short-term rental market brings this rapid renovation pattern into residential housing as well. And the lack of reuse and the constant preference for new, stylish, and yet often short-lived materials, this speed up the filling of landfills with construction debris. And also the rise of the digital nomad, this lifestyle made possible in large part by Airbnb, this introduced new ecological contradictions. Because often framed as minimalistic and experience-based, digital nomadism depends on high-frequency mobility, usually by airplane. So this creates a clear paradox, because many digital nomads express strong environmental concern, but their actual carbon footprint is very high. And while some try to reduce the impact by longer stays using local transport, the frequency of air travel remains the elephant in the room. And the influx of digital nomads into global south cities like Mexico City, Medellin, and Bali, this creates localized environmental pressures as well. Because these temporary citizens here, they demand first world amenities like high-speed internet, constant air conditioning, imported foods, and in regions where infrastructure can be fragile, this raises local energy intensity and effectively exports the high consumption lifestyle of the global north into neighborhoods that were never designed for it. So the growth of short-term rentals has generated not only economic pressure, but also a deep fracturing of the social fabric in cities. And in many neighborhoods, the replacement of long-term residents with tourists and digital nomads, They break down networks of trust, they reduces natural surveillance, that affect that James Jacobs says eyes on the street, and will increase sensory conflicts, especially with noise, waste, and also the rise of these party houses. So these impact fall on residents, while the financial benefits accrue to professional hosts and platforms. And in several global south cities such as Mexico City and Medellin, this dynamic takes on the character of accelerated gentrification and even digital colonialism. So rapid rent inflation, displacement of local families, and cultural reorientation toward a transient, higher income population. And politically, the expansion of Airbnb has relied on intense corporate lobbying and also strategies designed to weaken municipal regulatory power. And many cities lost governance capacity under the narrative that any restriction could harm the middle class. However, this cycle is beginning to shift. Recent court decisions and strong regulatory frameworks, such as New York's Local Law 18 and also in Berlin, these demonstrate that robust interventions can effectively return units to the long-term housing market and restore local sovereignty over land use. So taken together, these issues show that short-term rentals, when operated at scale, they are not merely a tourism matter, but a structural transformation that destabilizes communities, overheats housing markets, and undermines the right to the city. And this is why solutions must extend beyond traditional regulation alone. So promising responses include community land trusts, which permanently remove land from speculative markets and prevent housing from being converted into Airbnbs. Also, we have Airbnb, which demonstrates how platforms can operate without extracting value from communities, limiting professionalization and reinvesting part of their revenue locally. Also, additional technological and architectural interventions can help mitigate impacts, including noise monitoring tools, sustainability certifications, and deep energy retrofits. So guys, in short, addressing the crisis created by the short-term rental requires reordering urban priorities. So placing housing before speculation and community before tourist turnover. So this post-Airbnb city does not reject technology, it reclaims it, embedded digital platforms with democratic and sustainable models to ensure that the so-called sharing economy once again involves sharing, not extraction. So guys, I hope you have enjoyed this video, and tell me here in the comments, what do you think about it? How is your town with Airbnb? It's nice. Do you have some issues in your town? Tell me in the comments and let's expand this conversation. Also, press like and subscribe to the channel to keep receiving our next videos. Thank you for being here with me and have a great week.